Ms. McClendon, let me know if our stenographer, Ms. Miggets, is ready to go.
She is all set up.
All set up, okay. Good morning, everyone. This is a town hall meeting being held by the Philadelphia Gas Commission regarding PGW's diversification study. I will let you know that this meeting is being recorded, and by you being on this call, you consent to being recorded for the purposes of this conversation. Also, due to the current public health emergency, we are, as a gas commission, having this town hall meeting remotely, and we are using Zoom to make this remote town hall meeting possible. And instructions for how the public could participate in this town hall meeting was included in information provided prior to this meeting. For the purpose of this conversation, we will have representatives from E3 Portfolio Associates to do a overview of their work to date regarding the PGW diversification study. Also, we are joined today by members of the Gas Commission, as well as Christine Knapp from the Office of Sustainability and the American Cities Climate Change Challenge, which made this study possible. And for those who are testifying, we received a list of all of those who are testifying. They will testify in that order. We're asking individuals to keep their remarks to 2 minutes because we have a long number of people who are here to testify. And before you testify, please state your name for the record for the testimony. In addition, I'd like to know that for those who would like to submit written testimony, you have the ability to do so up until May 28th at 5 p.m. That written testimony can be sent to sustainability@phila.gov. I'll ask Ms. McClendon if she could put that information into the chat feature, but you'll have until May 28th to be able to submit that information in writing to be a part of this town hall conversation. With that, I'm now going to also state that any issues beyond the scope of the diversification study, that is beyond the scope of this conversation, those comments should be provided to PGW directly. And so we want to make sure that we're keeping the focus of this town hall on the PGW diversification study. With that, I will turn over the presentation to representatives from E3 and Portfolio Associates to provide a quick overview of the work they've provided and have done at this point. And then we will go into the actual conversation and town hall with those who are scheduled to testify this morning.
One thing before we begin that, again, as a reminder, if you are not, if it is not your turn to speak, please make sure that your device is on mute at this point. Again, if it is not your turn to speak, we need you to be on mute until it is your turn. Dan, give me one moment. Okay. Dan, you should be ready to go.
Great, thank you. It looks like I have the ability to share. Can someone please confirm that my screen is displaying?
Looks good.
Great. All right, Christine, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Good morning. I'm Christina Knapp, Director of the Office of Sustainability. Here to give you a little bit of context about how we decided to undertake this business diversification study for PGW. Hopefully most folks know already that climate change is already having an impact on Philadelphia and is projected to continue to have worsening impacts, both in terms of heat and in terms of more frequent and more severe storms combined with sea level rise, resulting in the types of flooding that's shown in the picture on the right, which was in Eastwick this past August during Tropical Storm Isaias. Next slide, please, Dan. And so in order to stave off the worst impacts of climate change, Mayor Heaney and the city has committed to achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. This is an increase over the mayor's previous goal of reducing emissions 80% by 2050. And that is because this is what science is telling us is necessary to do in order to stave off those most severe impacts of climate change. And fortunately, it is also the goal of our federal government and the Biden-Harris administration, also moving in the direction of what science is indicating to us is necessary. And you can see there's other sort of goals along the way of how we achieve carbon neutrality, but we have a lot of work to do. And if you haven't looked at the Climate Action Playbook in detail, I encourage you to do so. Next slide, please. So in thinking about how we achieve carbon neutrality, we have to look at what the sources of emissions are in Philadelphia, and buildings and industry by and far our largest source at 72%. And when we look at how buildings are contributing, a big part of that is the way that buildings are heated, which is often by PGW through the use of natural gas, which is a fossil fuel. And so while PGW provides a critical service, it is also contributing to this issue of our reaching our climate goals. And so as the city as the owner of PGW was really intrigued in exploring the question of how can PGW continue to thrive in the future, retain its workforce, and be economically viable, but while also helping us achieve our carbon neutrality goal. Next slide. So the Bloomberg American Cities Climate Challenge became an opportunity for the city to apply for some technical assistance and support to achieve carbon emissions reductions in buildings and transportation, the focus of the climate challenge. And so we applied with PGW for a variety of different activities, but including this business diversification study with the goals of really beginning to do what is bulleted here. Reviewing the range of different business pathways. We wanted to look at both new energy sources that PGW could use to deliver those services, but also new energy services that they could take on to expand their business portfolio and again have some new sources of revenue. We wanted to look at all of these different pathways against different criteria to understand what each option would do for, say, carbon reduction or job creation or the affordability of rates. We want to look at the regulatory and legal barriers that we know would sort of prevent or create some challenges for PGW to take on these options. We want to incorporate comments from public engagement, including today's session and prior opportunities that we've had. Developing the diversification tool, which would be an ongoing tool that we could use to keep looking at different business practices to see how they would evaluate those criteria beyond the sort of deliverable study that E3 will be delivering to us. And then actually propose a set of strategies and goals. And lastly, PGW had committed to taking on a pilot project of one of the things that was identified in the study as looking promising to test out in the short term. So this is what we have laid out here for the goals of this study. My last slide, next please, just to give folks a sense of who has been guiding this work. This is the working group of folks representing the city, the PGW itself, and then the two regulatory bodies that oversee PGW, the Gas Commission and the Public Facilities Management Corporation, as well as the Energy Authority and Local 686, the union that represents PGW workers. And so this group has helped us to actually write the scope of the study and has been meeting with the consulting team to provide guidance and ask questions and give input along the way. And with that, I'll turn it back to Dan Oz from E3, who is our consultant team, to walk you through the draft materials to start us off, and then we'll switch over to public comment.
Great, thank you, Christine. And good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Oss. I'm a director at E3, and E3 is an energy consulting firm with offices in Boston, New York, Calgary, and San Francisco. Our focus is really on the energy transition. What does the world look like as we shift from the current fossil fuel-based energy paradigm to one that is consistent with deep decarbonization and stabilization of the Earth's climate? We're joined on the project today by two partner firms, Portfolio Solutions and Portfolio Associates and eConsult Solutions, both of which are Philadelphia-based firms who have been helping us with various aspects of the project, including engagement and understanding the economic impacts of these diversification options on Philadelphia. So the agenda for today is a brief walkthrough of the study so far. I'll note that there are a more detailed set of materials available on the Office of Sustainability's website. So given the length of the presentation, this is necessarily an abridged version. So I encourage you to go look at those materials. But in short, what we'll be going through today are decarbonization options for PGW, the scope of this study in light of those decarbonization options, preliminary study findings, and next steps. So I'll start by noting that there are several different strategies that PGW might explore to decarbonize the building heating challenge that Christine mentioned in her intro. What we found across studies across North America and elsewhere in the world is that energy efficiency, including measures like more efficient appliances or weatherization, is a decarbonization strategy that is required in any scenario that achieves net zero. And Philadelphians have been pursuing energy efficiency for decades, as has PGW via its programs. So this will likely be something that would need to be expanded, but represents a continuation of what Philadelphia's been doing. But once we've done energy efficiency, what we need to start thinking about is how do we decarbonize the actual supply of heating energy going into buildings. So as Christine mentioned today, that supply is from natural gas, which is a fossil fuel that produces greenhouse gas emissions via combustion and via methane leaks. And what we'll want to think about is how we can replace that natural gas. One option is to consider decarbonized gases, meaning fuels that are delivered via pipeline, much like natural gas, but that produce low or no GHG emissions. The advantage of these fuels is that they repurpose existing infrastructure and thereby minimize customer disruption. So essentially, customers can continue to use the same appliances in most cases in their homes, and it's delivered via the same set of infrastructure as today. But a key drawback of these fuels is that they come at a substantial cost premium over natural gas, costing many times more than the cost of Marcellus shale gas that currently is delivered today. Electrification is a very different decarbonization pathway. It involves converting from appliances like furnaces to electric heat pumps. And electric heat pumps are a technology that are in principle similar to an air conditioner, but can both heat and cool a home. The advantage of this approach is that heat pumps can use an increasingly clean electric grid to efficiently heat buildings. A drawback of this approach is that it can lead to large impacts on electricity systems during very cold hours, especially if it's not accompanied by more comprehensive weatherization measures. Hybrid electrification refers to a strategy that uses heat pumps, but backs those heat pumps up with a gas furnace or boiler for those really cold periods of the year. So we're essentially trying to take advantage of the advantages of electrification, meaning the ability to provide efficient decarbonized heat for most of the year, while avoiding some of the drawbacks in the form of the grid impacts. So this is a scenario where essentially you're using the heat pumps in a gas furnace for backup. And one potential advantage of this solution from at least a PGW and workforce perspective is that it provides an ongoing role for PGW's infrastructure while still accommodating electrification in the city. And then there's a fourth option that we consider in this analysis, which is being explored in Massachusetts today, called a Geo Micro District, which is a shared ground source heat pump or geothermal system that delivers heat via a network of hot water pipes. And what's interesting about this option is that it is a form of electrification, but the infrastructure to deliver heat to the homes is very similar to the infrastructure that's used today by PGW. Essentially, it is pipes running through trenches and streets, but instead of delivering natural gas, it's delivering hot water sourced through electricity. So it offers an interesting form of electrification that might bridge some of the challenges of the high electrification scenario while still maintaining infrastructure that can be served by PGW and its workforce. So in each of these scenarios, PGW is going to face challenges that are sort of cross-cutting and warrant consideration as we evaluate diversification and decarbonization. So any successful diversification strategy will need to address challenges that include aging gas infrastructure. So like many utilities, PGW is in the midst of a long-term investment program to update its system by removing cast iron pipes. And at the same time, ongoing investments are needed in its system to ensure safety and reliability, which I think we can all agree cannot be allowed to degrade in any decarbonization future. There are also uncertainties in gas demands, meaning historical trends may no longer be the best predictor of future gas demands in Philadelphia. So in addition to the impacts of electrification, if customers are to choose an electric option that would lead to decreased demand, a warming climate is also expected to decrease heating demands in the city over the coming decades. And so diversification strategies should be robust against these uncertainties in gas demand. There's also the very important question of providing and retaining jobs. So PGW employs well over 1,000 employees, many of which are union jobs today. And any transition to high energy is delivered to Philadelphia's buildings requires careful consideration of the impacts on that labor force. And finally, in terms of health, safety, and equity challenges, Philadelphia has a substantial low-income population for whom paying their energy bills today is already a burden. And environmental justice communities within the city are more likely to be affected by the negative air quality impacts of combustion of fossil fuels within Philadelphia. So this means that the city's energy transformation carries meaningful equity considerations, including equity in terms of the sort of pocketbook bills that folks are paying, as well as things like health and safety that are more difficult to quantify as the pocketbook issues, but are very, very real. So the scope of this analysis, pardon me. Given the city's decarbonization commitments and those challenges I just outlined, E3 and our partners have been tasked to develop an assessment of diversification options for PGW. This includes an analysis phase, which we're close to wrapping up now, where we're working to identify things like emissions, PGW financial and customer affordability implications of these different options. It will culminate in a diversification study that summarizes the results of our quantitative analysis. So we'll be describing what these different energy futures look like and what different diversification options look like under them. And we'll also be recommending a set of pilot programs that might offer a near-term path forward for PGW to begin to move towards decarbonization and diversification. So in developing the study, our team has engaged in a variety of different forms of stakeholder engagement, including a workshop that was included over 43 participants. And this included a broad representation from the environmental community, the business community, social and equity interest groups, and a wide variety of other folks that had perspectives on PGW and diversification options. We followed that up with an online survey that went to a broad group of folks within Philadelphia that allowed folks to provide both responses to multiple choice questions as well as more open-ended responses. So as part of our study, we'll be summarizing the feedback that we received over the course of those two engagements. And then the city also engaged in partnership with the Philadelphia Association of Community Development Corporations and energy burden conversations, which were smaller, more focused discussions in order to draw out what are the key challenges facing communities across Philadelphia today with respect to their energy consumption and costs. I'll note that in addition to these, today represents an important engagement opportunity where we'll be looking to share the initial work we've done on this study, but I'm really looking forward to hearing your feedback on the work so far and incorporating that into the final results. Over the course of the engagement so far, we have identified 4 key criteria that sort of bubbled to the top across all of our different stakeholder engagements. These include greenhouse gas emissions. So do the different diversification options and decarbonization scenarios achieve GHG reductions that are consistent with the city's climate ambitions? Impact on air quality. Would this decarbonization and diversification scenarios improve outdoor and indoor air quality consistent with city ambitions and stakeholder interests and preferences? Impact on rate affordability. Do these scenarios decrease or stabilize bills or reduce the energy burden facing Philadelphians? And finally, impact on revenues and workforce. Do these options maintain a financially sound utility that continue to maintain safety, reliability, and sustain union jobs in Philadelphia? And so I'll note that we evaluate each of these criteria using different metrics, some of which are quantitative in nature, while others are more of a qualitative assessment. So I'm going to walk through a high-level summary of the results so far. And what we'll be looking at here are how 4 different broad energy directions compare against the 4 evaluation criteria. So this is by no means a comprehensive list of the ways that PGW may diversify or a comprehensive list of the energy directions might take, but we think it offers a nice representative cross-section of different options. So these scenarios include a decarbonized gas scenario, where PGW's base remains similar to today, but where their needs are served by fuels like RNG and hydrogen. An electrification scenario, where by 2050, most buildings in Philadelphia are heated by electric heat pumps. A hybrid electrification scenario that also electrifies most buildings, but does so using systems with gas backup. And finally, we have a hybrid electrification with Geo Micro District's case, where instead of replacing cast iron mains, as is sort of planned today with polyethylene or other sorts of conventional pipes today, PGW instead begins to convert segments of its system and neighborhoods they serve to shared ground source heat pump systems that I described earlier in the presentation. So It's important to note that each scenario writes in both positive and negative impacts, but at least on the dimension of greenhouse gas emissions, each of the scenarios has a positive impact. So by construction, we design scenarios that reduce GHG emissions to levels consistent with a net zero goal by 2050. That's a shared sort of constraint applied across all the scenarios. And the question is, how do they compare against the rest of our criteria having accomplished that goal? So the first factor I'll discuss is impact on air quality, which is one of our factors that we addressed from a qualitative perspective. But what I'll note is that each of the electrification scenarios substantially reduces combustion of natural gas in Philadelphia. So we're essentially moving the energy supply to a heat pump, which involves no combustion, reducing the amount of things like NOx and PM 2.5 that would be emitted within the city. The decarbonized gas scenario has no significant change in air quality. Essentially, you are continuing to combust gases that produce similar air pollution as current natural gas does, but you're not essentially making the problem any worse in that scenario. The story gets a little more mixed when we start thinking about impacts on affordability. And I'll go through each of the scenarios in turn. At scale, decarbonized gas, looking at the first row, has clear affordability challenges. So procuring enough gas to decarbonize PGW system would require large amounts of technologies, including a technology called synthetic natural gas. And these fuels are not yet commercialized today. When they are commercialized at scale, they're expected to cost approximately 5 to 10 times the current commodity price of natural gas. So you can imagine customers who are already constrained today by current natural gas prices, if you were to increase those by 5 to 10 times the commodity portion of the bills, you would start seeing some really challenging bills for those customers. Electrification, on the other hand, offers opportunities and challenges from an affordability perspective. On the one hand, customers may be able to experience bill savings when adopting electric heat pumps today. However, those heat pumps come at a cost premium over conventional gas appliances. More challenging in that scenario is distinction in costs between participants and non-participants. So absent mitigating measures, costs for non-participants, meaning those who are not electrifying, will rise as the costs of the PGW gas system are spread over a shrinking customer base. And so given the higher upfront cost of electrification, this raises the concern that those who are less well off may be less likely to be among the folks who are able to electrify. So you can imagine sort of this bifurcated world where this group of customers have moved over to relatively low cost heat pumps for their bills at least, and another group of customers are left paying very high gas bills. And that's a situation that I think the diversification options and the further phases of this study are meant to consider to address. Hybrid electrification has the lowest relative impact on participants and non-participants, so those who electrify and those who don't. And the reason for this is that the cost of the gas system is still being shared among a relatively large group of customers. So the exact split of those costs depends on policy, regulation, and rate design. But in general, the intuition is that there's a same set of costs are being shared over a broader set of customers, which leads to sort of a more equal set of cost impacts. And then finally, the affordability of Geo Micro Districts depends in large extent on how their costs are allocated, with a key question of being whether the full cost of the infrastructure is borne by the consumers who receive services from the Geo Micro District, or whether those costs are spread across the entire PGW customer base. So it's really a question of to what extent are those costs spread, or to what extent they're concentrated, which will really affect the economics of them for the sort of participant view, those who electrify, and the non-participant view. And our final criteria is impacts on revenues and workforce. And I'll note that we directly modeled impact on revenues in this analysis. We did not directly model impacts on workforce, so those are qualitatively assessed. The decarbonized gas scenario could lead to a future with stable revenues and workforce as PGW decarbonizes. The reason being that we are using the same system to deliver gas, which requires continued maintenance and investment in that system. However, in order for that outcome to be realized, these fuels would have to be cost competitive with alternative decarbonization strategies. Otherwise, customers will face a powerful incentive to electrify, putting the same pressures on the economics of the utility that we discussed on the previous slide. So if you were to go the strategy and decarbonized gases turn out to be more expensive than anticipated, you might end up in a world where you're pushing folks towards electrification, which will lead you to a world in which you are seeing declining utilization and the same sorts of issues I mentioned before. The high electrification scenario could lead to large reductions in revenues for PGW. I think it's important to acknowledge that, with both volumes of gas and number of customers falling sharply over the coming decades. This will create a tension between maintaining affordable rates and continue to make the safety and reliability related gas investments required for any gas utility. So we didn't model the impacts on PGW's workforce here, but we believe they warrant further investigation. I'll note that the transition to electrification will take several decades, and along that transition, the gas system will need to be maintained in order to make sure safety and reliability. So it's very much an open question of what, even under a high electrification scenario, what the pace of impacts on workforce would be. Turning to the hybrid scenario, the key difference here, as I noted before, is that the infrastructure of PGW continues to be used to deliver heat in Philadelphia, particularly on those very cold, extreme winter days. This would mean that the footprint of the system as set up today or near it would need to be maintained. And but in order for this to be achieved, you would have to believe that there is a relatively small amount of cost competitive decarbonized gas available, and that you're able to price the system and earn revenues for PGW system in a way that reflects the value it's creating. For instance, the value it's creating by avoiding electric system infrastructure upgrades. And then finally, from a revenue perspective, the Geo Micro Districts would spur new investments in PGW systems that go beyond those in its current cast iron mains replacement program or current revenue forecast. And so it's likely that PGW would need additional workers to install those systems, potentially leading to an overall increase in the workforce of PGW, with the challenge here being whether these systems can be installed in a way that is affordable, in a way that is competitive with other options. And I'll note that sort of the costs of the Geo Micro Districts are uncertain to a large extent because their feasibility and cost will depend to a large extent on sort of local circumstances, things like geology, the density of the buildings, and the heating demands. And so that's something that we think warrants additional study as well. So in sum, I'll note that each of the decarbonization scenarios includes positives and negatives across the criteria we evaluated, with the exception of the criteria that we constrained them all to meet. And so I'll note it doesn't appear that there's a single silver bullet solution that balances all of these criteria, just looking at it from an energy directions perspective. So this raises the need for creative thinking on the future of PGW, including diversification into new business models. So right now, the project team is working on evaluating different diversification options, different business models for PGW. And what we're trying to do is think about different models that map to the decarbonized energy directions that I presented before. So what would a world look like for PGW in the electrification scenario? What would it look like for them in the hybrid scenario? What would be their role? And so we're considering multiple different options, including options that are more similar to their current business models. So those would be things like procuring gas in the form of RNG, installing pipes to deliver shared geothermal heat pump energy to buildings, weatherization, which is something PGW has already done, as well as additional revenues that might be earned from things like LNG or CNG supply. But we're also exploring a set of solutions that are a bit further afield from what PGW currently does. A lot of these are trend more towards services rather than infrastructure. So for instance, strategic electrification or heat as a service are scenarios where PGW might have a role in financing the cost of a heat pump or a hybrid heat pump installation in a home. The load aggregator scenario is a world in which PGW has a role in using its system to manage the winter peak time demands of electrification. And then there's other options we're looking at that are a bit more transformational, a bit further afield from the core business that PGW provides today. And those would be things like microgrids or community solar. So to conclude, I'm going to go through a brief overview of the preliminary findings from this analysis and discuss next steps. So the first preliminary finding is that decarbonizing PGW is a priority to achieve the city's climate goals, but will require innovation and likely new sources of revenues to address energy affordability challenges in Philadelphia. Exclusive reliance on decarbonized gas is risky and probably poses unsustainable bill impacts to all PGW customers in the long run, and does not necessarily address other city and stakeholder priorities, for instance, improving air quality. Exclusive reliance on electrification can reduce energy bills for households that electrify, but increases bills for customers remaining on the gas system, posing equity challenges unless mitigated. Hybrid electrification options may present a feasible decarbonization path that balances impacts on customers who electrify and customers who do not, that participant versus non-participant questions, but it comes with its own questions about being able to procure enough decarbonized gas and the sort of carrying cost of the PGW system over time. And then geothermal micro districts represent a promising option for some customer types, but their cost and feasibility in Philadelphia are uncertain. So more data are needed on the real world cost of these systems and their suitability given Philadelphia's geology, housing density, and infrastructure. So what are our next steps? Our next steps include research on potential diversification options, as I just outlined for PGW, and mapping those diversification options to the different net, carbon neutral energy directions PGW might take. Alongside that, there's research being done on the legal and regulatory feasibility of these new business models. So PGW exists under a current legal and regulatory model, and not all of the options we outlined above are currently permitted under that model. There'll be an assessment of that. We'll be incorporating stakeholder feedback, both feedback we've received so far and feedback from this town hall, and then identifying, evaluating potential pilot project opportunities that can take these more long-term visions and turn them into near-term opportunities. And all this will be summarized in a final report that we'll be wrapping up by the end of June. So with that, thank you again for your time today, and we're looking forward to hearing your feedback and input on the study so far.
Thank you, Dan, for that presentation. I want to thank the work that's being done by E3 Portfolio Associates and eConsult putting together next steps. For the next step in today's town hall, I will have Jamela McClendon Esquire, who is our Executive Director of the Gas Commission, and other staff from the Gas Commission to now begin with those who have signed up to testify to provide public comment.
Thank you, Councilman Green. Before we get started, just a reminder, at this moment right now, we are only taking comments from those who have already signed up. We will be going straight down the list that was provided to us from the Office of Sustainability, who managed the sign-up process. Everyone will be allotted 2 minutes to speak. At that, we will call 30 seconds when there's about 30 seconds left in your allotted time. And once the 2 minutes is lapsed, we will have to mute you because there are a lot of people on the call who wish to speak today. As a reminder, I've already put this information in the chat. If you have additional comments that need to be made, if you have any sort of written materials, including slides and things of that nature, all of that information can be submitted to the Office of Sustainability at sustainability@phila.gov up until May 28th. That will be, your opportunity to make sure that everything that you want to say and get before the office for consideration and finalizing the report is received by them at that time. The final thing is, as Councilman Green mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, this is being recorded. We also have a court reporter who is taking a full transcript of the meeting, which will be posted on the Gas Commission's website once fully prepared, and also, Christine, I believe, on Sustainability's website. So please be mindful when you are speaking to say your name. We are going to call your name, but please, once again, state your name and speak clearly and not too fast, so that she can record everything that you're saying without interrupting your time. It is a limited amount of time, and we want to make sure that you are able to use all of it with as few interruptions as possible. So again, state your name for the record, and also please make sure that you are speaking clearly and not at too fast of a pace so that she can capture everything that you're saying. And with that, I am turning it over to Heidi Wushinsky, hearing examiner for the Gas Commission.
Okay, first on the list of speakers, we have Tammy Murphy from Physicians for Social Responsibility. So Tammy, I guess I will mute myself when you're ready to speak, and then start your time then.
Okay, my name is Tammy Murphy. I just put part of my comments in the chat. I'm not sure if, I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to share my screen or share links, so I put some of those in the chat. To be honest with you, I'm a little bit disappointed that the final report and the final plan seems to be set for June, and it's May, and we're now having the town hall. So lots of what I have to say is basically like, it seems like it's a little bit too late to take into consideration. But the first thing that I would like for anybody who is considering continuing the use of the unconventional gas development industry in the future plans for PGW, including toxic, expensive options such as LNG, CNG, and RNG. The first thing that I would have you consider, and I'm happy to come in person and explain this to you more carefully. This is in the chat also, but this is the PSR compendium on the harms and the health impacts of fracking. There are about 1,700 different studies that you can look at that talk about the harms and health impacts of the industry and what that does overall in Pennsylvania and also throughout the country and throughout the world. More specifically to take into consideration is the environmental health news link that I did put into the chat. That talks.
Sorry, that's 30 seconds.
Wow. Okay. So that talks specifically about the health impacts. It should be taken into consideration that there are cancers and other health harms happening throughout the state that other countries and other states have considered human rights violations, and that our end use product in Philadelphia should consider the fact that other people are harmed throughout the state. There's 67 cases of rare cancer in one small area in Southwest Pennsylvania. 13 children have already died, and that is replicated throughout the state. There's other scenarios similar throughout the state. So those kinds of things need to be taken into consideration. I also think that you need to—
Thank you, that's 2 minutes.
Right.
Thank you. Okay, next we have John Deanna. Excuse me if I said your name wrong. John, are you here? Jack? John also goes by Jack. Okay, let's move on to Peter Winslow.
Thank you, Heidi. My name is Peter Winslow. I'm speaking today as president of a Smart Collaboration LLC. Thank you, Chairman Green and members of the Gas Commission for this opportunity to participate in the public discussion of the PGW diversification study. Many thanks to Director Knapp and the Office of Sustainability, as well as Mr. Ask and Energy, Environmental and Economics and E3 Associates.
Heidi, I apologize. Someone was not on mute and they spoke over Mr. Winslow, and it interfered with me being able to hear him. So could Mr. Winslow begin his comments again after public discussion of PGW's diversification study?
Okay, sure. And I'll start your time again, Mr. Winslow. And if you are not speaking, could you please remember to mute? Thank you.
Thank you. I just appreciate the opportunity and thanking the folks who brought this together, including Bloomberg and others who provided the funding. I'd like to comment that the infographic format of the draft materials it helps to make the broad overview and major points clear to a wide audience. So I applaud the accessibility this format provides for the general public. However, in the absence of a more detailed narrative, an explanation of methodology, a sharing of analysis, and a collegial discussion, interested parties, such as the people on this call, cannot obtain the full benefit of the work that's been performed by E3. So I hope such explanatory information will be forthcoming and shared in the near future. As Tammy points out, the time for concluding this work is short, so I'd hope that that information will be coming to us fairly soon. By the standards of the city's usual practices, the public involvement provided by the diversification study has really been exemplary. Unfortunately, the usual practice of the city set a really low bar. Moreover, while the outreach has been broader than usual, it's not been deep enough. So we're gratified that the study confirms much of what the environmental justice community has been saying for quite some time. and that this work has added more rigor to the discussion and has been comprehensive in its approach.
Mr. Winslow, that's 30 seconds left.
Okay, so let me just say that next steps call for a pilot project. Let's be bold. I suggest we seize the opportunity provided by redevelopment of the former refinery by Hilco Redevelopment Partners adjacent to the PGW Passyunk facilities. Within the 1,300-acre property and the surrounding neighborhoods, extensive geothermal and photovoltaic resources can be developed to serve both industry and residences in a community network. And as opposed to a small pilot project, let's have a pilot project that has significant impact on the problem. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's your time, and thank you for your testimony. Okay, next.
Heidi, 1 second. I'm
Sure.
sorry, 1 second before you go on. I just want to remind everybody, again, we know it's a limited amount of time. We want to be able to get through everyone who wants to speak. So please, please, please try to focus your comments, within the time frame. Get out your most important points. You do have the opportunity to submit additional comments on additional areas after this meeting. Thanks, Heidi.
Thank you. On our list of testimony, next we have Christina Coleman.
Thanks, Heidi. My name is Christina Coleman. I am speaking today on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce of Philadelphia. Our organization shares the same priorities as many, that PGW system must safeguard ratepayers, maintain reliability, retain workforce, and ensure the health and safety of our residents. However, the recommended strategies in the study fail to feasibly meet those goals. It is well known that the resulting increase in electricity demand from the displacement of natural gas can actually lead to increasing emissions from the power generation sector. The study only accounts for site energy, which does not include the losses incurred in the production, transmission, and delivery of energy. The natural gas we all use to heat our homes and cook is more than 91% efficient compared to electricity produced by natural gas, which is only 45% efficient. To understand the net gains of electrification scenarios, it is essential to consider the generation mix. Currently, natural gas generation makes up 43% of PJM's grid mix. The diversification study anticipates that over time, emission benefits of electrification will increase as PJM system decarbonizes. If all generation resources were zero emitting, displacing direct use natural gas with electricity would result in net emission benefits. But this does not reflect the current reality or realistic expectation of the grid mix for the foreseeable future. We know that residential natural gas only accounts for 4% of US emissions. Even assuming 100% clean energy grid mix, the emission reductions are marginal. Put simply, the strategies outlined in the study demonstrate a least cost-effective methods for reducing emissions. The study also does not provide a full assessment of the costs. The costs of both the electrification and hybrid scenarios do not account for capital costs of distribution system upgrades required to meet the growth in electricity demand. Natural gas is the lowest cost energy today. 2021 forecast.
That's 30 seconds.
Thank you. 2021 forecasts show that on an energy equivalent basis, electricity will cost $39 per million BTU, while natural gas costs about $11. We urge the Commission to request a more transparent evaluation of the total costs associated with these strategies. As we collectively work towards a recovery for the city, we need decision-making that balances the economic and environmental costs. We hope these concerns will be addressed in the next steps. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Mitch Chen.
Great. If you can give me just 1 second to pull up my comments.
Sure.
Okay. Switching screens. Okay. My name is Mitch Chen, and I'm a member of Power and Philly Thrive, as well as other local organizations, and I've lived in Northeast Philly for most of my life. The crises that we face here in Philly are interconnected. The urgent threat of climate catastrophe, deep poverty, unaffordable energy bills, home disrepair, and widespread asthma are all related. And to solve them, we need to transform PGW and our wider energy system, as well as our buildings. The draft materials for the diversification study are a good, though very limited, first step toward figuring out how to do that. I'm encouraged to see the materials confirm that building electrification is essential and that they begin exploring possibilities for network geothermal systems, but much more is needed. For example, the draft materials say very little about options for repairing buildings and making them highly energy efficient. I'd like to see the completed report address those possibilities in much greater depth. A bold, comprehensive repair and retrofit program would improve residents' health, make our homes more comfortable and resilient, bring down energy bills, create jobs, and reduce displacement. It would also crucially greatly limit the cost of new equipment and infrastructure that will be needed for heating and cooling buildings as we decarbonize. I hope the study will kick off a fully participatory, community-based planning process over the coming months so we can create the bold plans that we need. I urge PGW and the city to undertake a pilot project that involves installing network geothermal systems as well as home repairs and retrofits. At the same time, while we plan the future of PGW, I ask the gas commissioners to take action to stop PGW from lobbying against the policies that we'll need to achieve the goals that the study addresses. You'll hear more about that from colleagues this morning. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Next up, we have Michael Heaney.
My name is Michael Heaney. I'm a resident of Philadelphia, a certified energy manager, and a former employee of Philadelphia's Office of Sustainability as recently as 2015. OOS has done a great job so far managing the diversification study, but Philadelphia needs a strong independent manager for this process from here on out, because the Gas Commission can easily ignore an internal city department. This is exactly what happened in 2014 when the proposed sale of PGW was the subject of a multi-million-dollar report prepared by city employees, including OOS and the law department. City Council simply ignored the report and did not hold hearings on the sale. A strong outside organization would be harder to ignore and more likely to push back if its recommendations were ignored or delayed. Secondly, climate-driven issues are usually characterized by distrust from proponents with opposing viewpoints. The Gas Commission and the mayor have lost the trust of Philadelphians concerned about climate change because of their recent approval of the PGW LNG plant in Southwest Philadelphia. OOS is subordinate to the mayor and city council, as demonstrated by the non-transparency of the 2014 sale of PGW. One outside organization that is well positioned to manage this process would be the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy at Penn. Researchers at Kleinman have provided unbiased insights into local energy issues such as the refinery and the LNG plant. I commend OOS on the transparency of the diversification study thus far, but as studies transition into action, a strong independent manager is needed.
That's 20 seconds left. Oh, thank you. Okay, next we have Mike Ewell.
Hi, I'm Mike Ewell with Energy Justice Network. It's nice to see any move away from natural gas, and I'd like to know if the transition services being made available to residents will be available to those on oil heating systems and not just those currently on gas. I was not happy, though, to see the litany of false solutions included in this study. It was weak on conservation and efficiency. Conservation is not even mentioned. It talks in just 2 places about nuclear, and it mentions nuclear retention as a good thing, and fails to recognize that nuclear power is not zero carbon and definitely not zero emissions. And the environmental racism aspect of where the uranium comes from and where the waste disposal ends up is huge and looms large in the nuclear issue. So I don't think it's reasonable to expect these aging nuclear reactors to last or to be part of a so-called zero carbon strategy with electrification. The report also selectively looks beyond the smokestack to benefit both gas and bioenergy and treats them differently. It assumes that the grid shift from coal to natural gas means lower greenhouse gases, even though it's actually higher if you include the extensive methane leakage in the system. On the other hand, they do look at the larger picture on biogenic carbon, but do so with outdated science, assuming that it's carbon neutral, even though it's been scientifically debunked repeatedly for over a decade that biomass and biofuels are actually, and renewable natural gas, so-called, are actually worse than their fossil fuel counterparts for the climate, and yet those emissions are zeroed out based on outdated science and double counting. On page 15, the report mentions gasified biomass, and that has no place in a study when gasification is horribly expensive and tends not to work, is quite polluting.
Excuse me, that's your 30-second warning.
Thank you. And there's no way a community will allow this to be built at scale, and I promise to lead the fight against any effort to build those. Finally, it mentions zero waste by 2035 as a goal, which the city does have in other documents that are referenced here. Yet the waste sector is probably a lot more than 3% of the greenhouse gases in the city that this report attributes to it, if you account for it correctly. It relies on continued use of trash incineration, which is about twice as bad as landfilling for the climate.
Excuse me, that's your time.
Environmental justice problem. And I'll just, next thing is, it doesn't mention unit-based pricing or savings and throw at all. In waste reduction, that's the most effective and cost-effective way to quickly reduce waste that needs to be in the plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ewell. And if just a reminder to everyone, if you don't get to finish what you want to say, please submit the rest of your comments in the form of written testimony. Okay, next up we have Zainab Magavi.
Hello, yes.
Hello.
I'm a co-executive director of HEAT. Thank you for the opportunity. I wish to comment on the potential of the Geo Micro District, which can be interconnected like Lego blocks to grow a utility scale geogrid, allowing for an incremental evolution of a gas grid into a non-emitting thermal utility. Specifically, nearly every street can be served by such a geogrid utility. However, some need deeper boreholes, more advanced drilling, or other adaptations to meet the total demand. So HEAT likes to propose the potential be evaluated as follows. The gas system transition divided into 3 categories based on cost benefit thresholds. First, strategic abandonment by the gas utility, whether it's because there is low energy use density, think a farmhouse every 2 miles, which doesn't make sense to pipe together. We have very little of this in Boston, and I suspect the same is true for Philadelphia. Second, where the geology is entirely incompatible, likely rare given the 3 general types of bedrock in Philadelphia. There's another segment of the gas system, so that's that you don't abandon. It's called strategic maintenance, those industries that rely on high intensity combustion. And it is pretty straightforward to determine a longer term evolution path to RNG or hydrogen for these customers. The third category is the rest of the gas system, the vast majority. And it is appropriate for consideration for strategic evolution from gas to non-emitting thermal delivery by geogrid. Doing so has additional system scale benefits beyond those mentioned, including cutting peaks and reducing the total power grid load of full electrification.
Excuse me, that's your 30-second warning.
I would like to invite Philadelphia to join our growing GeoGrid consortium at HEAT. We're working very hard to create an open source and collaborative approach to the development of this new path, and join us in boldly reimagining our energy system for a safer, better world for all.
Thank you. Next, we have Audrey Shulman.
Great, thank you. I'm the other co-executive director at HEAT. That came up with the Geo Micro District. I wanted to make 1 or 2 corrections. It's a system of networked ground source heat pumps. The pipes are filled with just plain water, which absorb temperature of the ground. Thus, they do not have piped hot water, which was stated in the study. I wanted to make sure there was no basic misunderstanding here. Networked heat pumps provide both heating and cooling, and can provide load canceling because of that. For instance, a supermarket's fridges might use a lot of cooling and thus return the water into the shared loop hotter. That heat can then be used by homes down the street. The system does not serve only nearby homes, which was also in the presentation. It would be most efficient when serving many different buildings with different heating and cooling needs. In terms of energy bills with gas, the cost of the fuel is about 60% of your current gas bill. With the geothermal system, there would be no gas. Thus, that cost would be gone. Applied Economics Clinic here projected average annual heating bills of gas versus networked geothermal, calculating geothermal to cost around half of that of gas. The geothermal system would last just as long as the gas system, and thus the installation cost can and should be amortized over decades, same as the gas system. The gas can provide—
That's a 30-second warning.
backup supplemental heat, which would be rarely used, and thus the whole gas geosystem can be considered one hybrid system in terms of regulation and customer amortization. There's a variety of installations going into the ground in Massachusetts and New York. Mayor de Blasio announced potential legislation in New York to allow the future installations to scale. There's a lot of interest nationally. Networked geothermal meets your evaluation criteria. It can result in low cost, safer, renewable energy for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Walter Sue.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to speak today about the PGW Diversification Plan. My name is Dr. Walter Sue, and I'm speaking on behalf of Physicians for Social Responsibility in Pennsylvania, although we are based here in Philadelphia. I'll begin by noting that there are significant health impacts of burning of gas indoors, especially when used as a substitute for heating one's house in the winter. But even regular indoor use, particularly with baking in the oven or cooking with all four burners, will release criteria air pollutants, including nitrogen oxide, VOCs, carbon monoxide, and ultrafine particles. All of these can adversely impact the respiratory status of household residents. Of particular concern are young children whose lungs are still developing and will breathe in twice the indoor air relative to the size of their lungs compared to adults. The result, of course, is that poor indoor air quality adversely impacts some children, triggering asthma and bronchitis. In older people with borderline respiratory status, these odorless and colorless pollutants can trigger difficulty breathing. It's worth noting that gas boilers are required to be vented outdoors, but somehow indoor stoves are frequently used without the use of the hood, or in many cases, a microwave hood, which simply recirculates the bad air. Finally, in my remaining time, I want to say that of the four choices given for PGW, we need to move the geothermal microgrids, as just mentioned, and electrification. Decarbonized gas, whether from biogas or synthetic natural gas, still puts carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And hydrogen, unless it's from the electrolysis of water by renewables, comes from burning natural gas, which just simply greenwashes the problem. If we're going to spend the money to avoid the worst—
Excuse me, just about 20 seconds left.
Let's do it right. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you for your testimony.
Next, we have Thomas Schuster.
Good morning. My name is Tom Schuster. I'm the Clean Energy Program Director for the Sierra Club Pennsylvania chapter. We fully support the goal of full decarbonization by 2050. This study clearly shows that all realistic options for decarbonization involve significant electrification of buildings. This electrification must begin in earnest immediately. All scenarios also require alternative revenue sources for PGW. Given the number of options available, we recommend that multiple pilots be pursued following this initial study. The Sierra Club recommends one pilot that tests the feasibility of network geothermal systems. The concept is very promising in terms of energy efficiency, the retention of workers, and alternative revenues for PGW. These systems require utility coordination of many stakeholders and will not be driven by the market alone, making them an appropriate candidate for a pilot. That said, network geothermal will not be the best solution everywhere, and the complexity of the first project may mean the pilot takes years to complete. Therefore, additional pilots to assist low-income customers to electrify should be undertaken immediately as well. It's clear that the high electrification scenario offers the lowest cost to participants by a wide margin. We share the concerns about the cost to the last non-participants in this scenario, who could be mostly low income. Upgrading and electrifying low-income customers first has to be the goal, and the Philadelphia Energy Authority's Built to Last program offers a promising solution with its holistic approach to home rehabilitation, weatherization, and electrification. PGW should partner with Built to Last during its 2-year pilot to determine how it can provide heat as a service while reducing capital outlay for customers. Strategic targeting of whole neighborhoods for retrofits, allowing for decommissioning sections of the gas system, could also be a goal of the pilot. Thank you for the opportunity to comment, and we look forward to submitting more details in writing.
Thank you, Tom. Next, we have Julie Greenberg.
Thank you, Commissioners. I am Julie Greenberg, Director of Power's Climate Justice and Jobs team. We are counting on you as democratically elected representatives to guide PGW into a just transition away from fossil fuel and towards a sustainable business model. Climate crisis and extreme inequality are the greatest moral issues of the day. We cannot defer to business as usual to solve these problems. That's why we are contesting in the public forum of democracy for new, innovative solutions. From our research, we have learned that electrification is essential to a sustainable future for our city and our planet. From the business diversification study materials, we see that network geothermal energy may be the best way to meet our goals of affordability, renewability, fair labor, and health and safety. We also think network geothermal, built and operated by PGW, is the best way to protect the institution of PGW and the workforce. PGW should focus on creating new energy infrastructure, home efficiency investments, and heat as a service, rather than collapsing in a death spiral as people who can afford to switch to electrification do so, while those who are energy burdened remain in the sinking ship of PGW. We would like to see the pilot project done on network geothermal energy. We recommend the standard best practice of having third-party expert evaluation of the design, implementation, and evaluation of the pilot. With a well-designed pilot, all parties will learn together that we can find mutually acceptable solutions. In the meantime, we ask that you, our elected leaders, direct PGW to stop paying trade association fees to groups that lobby against electrification. This undermines democracy and needs to end. We will be offering further written comments and look forward to seeing responses in the final report. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Julie. Next, Dwayne Royster.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, excuse me. I'm Bishop Dwayne Royster, Executive Director of Power Interfaith. We are a multi-faith, multiracial organizing force deeply rooted in Philadelphia, working for racial and economic justice on a livable planet. Thank you for responding to our request for meaningful public participation in relation to the business diversification study and overall for a just transition for PGW. We'll be submitting detailed written comments soon. Power supports a bold pilot project on network geothermal, which we see as the most promising options for good jobs in a just transition. But the shocking fact is that PGW's lobbying activities are undermining the city's goals. The business diversification study shows a powerful and essential role for building electrification in a sustainable future for PGW. However, PGW funds and participates actively in lobbying campaigns by the gas industry trade associations, such as the American Gas Association and the American Public Gas Association, that seek to block and oppose building electrification. We have also received very concerning reports that PGW is currently lobbying and working to support for Senator Yaw's bill that seeks to preempt municipalities from adopting policies advancing building electrification. We understand that there's a Senate hearing about the bill underway this morning. This lobbying is directly opposed to the city's interest. City Council unanimously passed a resolution opposing Senator Yaw's preemption bill a couple of weeks ago. The city should require PGW to provide a comprehensive and public accounting of its lobbying activities relating to the Yaw bill and to build electrification generally, and PGW must direct in no uncertain terms to cease such activities. Such strong action is necessary to ensure that the business diversification study has a meaningful future. Why spend so many public resources on the study if PGW is allowed to work behind the scenes to undermine the study's recommendations? Thank you, and we look forward to seeing our concerns and recommendations reflected in the final draft of the study.
Thank you, Bishop Royster. Next, we have Mr. Stephen Greenspan.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name is Dr. Stephen Greenspan. I'm a member of Power's Climate Justice and Jobs team. As a retired Vice President of Research and Innovation at a Fortune 500 IT company, I wish to focus my remarks on two areas that are not well examined in the report: innovative business models such as heat as a service and the focus of the pilot program. The traditional business model for most gas utilities involves selling more and more gas to generate revenue. The devastating consequences of this business model for our planet, our health, and environmental justice are well documented. In contrast, the goal of a heat as a heat as a service business model is to maintain well-heated homes. With heat as a service, weatherization and networked geothermal solutions are in the company's bottom line interests because they reduce the need for additional energy. I'll provide further details in writing. Regarding the pilot, we will learn little from piloting RNG, simple electrification, or hybrid scenarios. Pilots should encourage innovation while promoting health and safety, energy renewability, affordability, and sustainable union jobs. I ask the Commission to use this opportunity to examine networked geothermal and concurrently heat as a service or similar business models. It is also vital that the pilot's design and analysis be subject to transparency, community participation, and third-party verification. In closing, I ask the commissioners to encourage climate justice and innovation and to prohibit PGW from any efforts to weaken the city's electrification and environmental justice efforts. Ratepayer revenue should never be used to undermine ratepayer values. Thank you for your time and attention. I hope these comments will be considered in the final report.
Thank you, Dr. Greenspan. Next, we have Ms. Elisa McCool.
Elisa actually emailed me that she is unable to make it today, so we can skip to the next person.
Thank you. Nancy Boxer.
Good morning, Nancy Boxer with the Association for Climate Health. We are opposed to your first option, substituting decarbonized gas and piping it around the same leaky pipes will continue to pour carbon into the atmosphere. It also shares the safety and health risks of natural gas, so is no improvement to public health. We are uncomfortable about the cost of a hybrid system, which requires buildings to maintain 2 HVAC systems, even if one is rarely used. This is costly and burdens low-income residents the most. Possible exception, inexpensive electric space heaters for residential users. But a geothermal microdistrict has many advantages, saves jobs and money, is safer, helps achieve climate goals, repurposes potentially stranded assets, provides cooling for those who otherwise can't afford it. Ground source heat pumps had the most support and the least opposition in your survey and can satisfy the top concerns of survey respondents. Your own staff at Bartram's Garden, the police tactical training site, and Kensington High School all say their geothermal systems run quieter, smoother, and cheaper than traditional HVAC systems. And for projects with a long time horizon, geothermal is cheaper with a smaller carbon footprint and a better safety record. So why not let PGW try the most exciting future available to gas utilities today? Potential pilot sites include the community college, city health centers, municipal buildings, schools, housing projects, museums. Some could be networked together. Why not test drive a geothermal microdistrict? We say go for it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nancy. John Deanna. John Deanna. If not, we'll move along to Alexandra Kroger.
Thank you to the Philadelphia Gas Commission for holding this meeting today. My name is Alexandra Kroger, and I'm the Energy Programs Director of the Energy Co-op, Philadelphia's only renewable energy nonprofit cooperative. We were the first supplier to offer a renewable electricity alternative to Philadelphians in a newly deregulated electricity market in the late 1990s. And since 2015, we've been offering renewable natural gas, or RNG, a more sustainable alternative recovered from organic waste facilities without drilling or fracking for people who use natural gas to heat their homes and businesses. We began supplying RNG in the PGW territory in late 2019. The environmental value of RNG in energy production is in its conversion of methane to carbon dioxide. As a greenhouse gas, methane is by some measures 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide. RNG also offers a more sustainable alternative to conventional gas because its production does not involve drilling or hydraulic fracturing. The environmental advantages of RNG over conventional natural gas are clear, and we see it in the popularity of our RNG product. However, the question of whether RNG should be part of a long-term policy to decarbonize our energy infrastructure is a different matter. At the Energy Co-op, we continue to innovate in order to ensure the availability of RNG supply for Philadelphians, but we also recognize that RNG is more than likely a very significant but interim step on the path to decarbonization. The future of heat generation for homes and businesses will require a further leap to justify the considerable investment that will be needed. The PGW study has identified several challenges for the future of the natural gas economy in Philadelphia. Ultimately, we believe that all of the challenges will be best met by a carbon-free electrification strategy that relies on renewable electricity and energy storage technology. This strategy will generate new jobs for construction, maintenance, and operation of entirely new infrastructure, including the existing workforce. Lastly, and most indisputably, the use of clean renewable energy to provide heating for all is the healthiest, safest, and most equitable option for Philadelphia. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Alexandra. And next, Katie Bartolota.
Good morning. My name is Katie Bartolota, and I'm the Policy and Programs Director at Green Building United, a mission-based member organization of industry professionals, including architects, engineers, contractors, developers, building owners and managers, and more. Our members play a critical role in the built environment, including decision-making around equipment in new and existing buildings and homes. In this study, the viable modeled options for decarbonizing gas end uses feature electrification as a strategy. We know that electrification is comparable, even cheaper, in terms of upfront and long-term utility costs in newly built homes. We know that electrification in existing homes is more affordable when paired with energy efficiency and weatherization measures. We know that electrification improves indoor air quality, which impacts health. With electrification as a potential path forward for PGW, we need to fully vet the technical and financial feasibility of scaling electrification in existing homes, especially those in need of repair, through a pilot program. This is a critical need to ensure that low-income Philadelphians are not left behind in a transition. The study also makes clear that consumer decisions on how to heat their homes are largely outside of PGW's control. So how do consumers make decisions on what to install in their homes? The vast majority of home HVAC replacements are happening on an emergency basis. The decision that consumers are making in a moment of need is locked in for the long lifespan of the equipment they're choosing. To support electrification as a viable option, we need to ensure that all points in the process are equipped to make a supportive decision. Consumers need assurance that electrification meets their affordability, comfort, and health needs. Contractors need familiarity and experience with equipment installation and high impact efficiency measures that pair best with electrification. Grant, loan, and rebate program implementers need evidence of electrification improving cost, comfort, and indoor air quality. A robust existing homes electrification program as the next phase of this process can help answer these critical questions and help PGW assess the viability of some of the diversification options that were briefly presented in this draft. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Katie. Next, we have Alex Baumstein of Baumstein.
Hi, my name is Alex Baumstein, and I live at 9th and Dickinson in South Philly. Thanks for holding this today. My wife and I were customers of PGW through December 2019. On December 17th, 2019, we finally got our house free of fracked gas completely, closing our PGW account and removing our boilers, radiators, and water heater. We went completely electric. Our electricity is now sourced from rooftop solar and grid-sourced wind power. 2 days later, on December 19th, 2019, a gas explosion killed 2 people and destroyed 5 houses just a block from my house. Since then, we've had PGW trucks doing work of some sort or another outside our house at least every few months. There's actually one outside right now. A block away, neighbors walk their dogs on the grass where 5 houses stood for a century. A block in another direction from our house is a parking lot, where half a century ago, another gas explosion took down 3 other houses in our neighborhood. We don't need this and we don't want it. I've been telling everyone I can to get off gas. It's killing the planet and it's killing my neighbors. It will keep killing my neighbors as long as we keep piping it into our neighborhoods. And gas is finite. There's only so much in the ground. It's going to run out sooner or later. PGW will stop selling gas sooner or later. The only question is how many more people need to die first, how much more wrecking of the planet is going to happen first. I don't want PGW to be part of any of that. PGW needs to move into new business lines and transition out of gas as soon as humanly possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Mehdi Intizari, or Medai Intizari, sorry for mispronouncing.
No,
Mehdi.
Good morning. My name is Mehdi Intizari, a resident of Philadelphia and a member of the Geodelphia Group. Thank you for the opportunity, and my focus today is on geothermal microdistrict option mentioned on slides 34 and 35. As stated on the two slides, a viable diversification option for PGW is to be a provider of cooling and heating as a service by investing in, owning, and maintaining the systems and infrastructure. I recommend looking into the business model of Dandelion Energy in the state of New York and Connecticut to learn more about how that is done. As mentioned on slide 35 of the report, the characteristic of the local geology and building topology are the major focus on the initial cost. My recommendation is for PGW to use the geology data from the many buildings within the perimeter of the city that have already switched to geothermal heating and cooling system. This approach will enable PGW to build a more accurate cost model, and consequently, it will enable to skip the piloting phase and start the new line of business by installing the systems in the municipal buildings and public schools. This approach also puts the city on the right path to meet its 2030 net zero target, which is reducing energy use by 20% and municipal carbon emission by 50%. With respect to school buildings, every year students in the vast majority of the 200 plus Philadelphia public schools are held hostage by the heat in the classroom during the hot weather. It is understood that some of the buildings are old, but that is only suitable and fair for, that is not suitable for our kid. Any investment made in the geothermal reduces the operating costs and allow the city and the PGW to fully recover their investment in a reasonable time. Regarding the non-public buildings, for quick rollout and better return on investment, my recommendation is based on Massachusetts put to major focuses on multi-tenant buildings, multi-tenant single owner buildings, and multi-buildings campuses owned by colleges, hospitals, and business. And finally, the diversification of PGW will necessitate removing the word gas from the current name of the company. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Russell Hicks.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify in the public statement. I appreciate the commissioner. I want to say that I am Russell Hicks. I am Russell Hicks, representing Power, Climate Justice, and Jobs Team. I would like to state my support for PGW pursuing a pilot program on network geothermal, which Power believes has a great promise and could bring good local green jobs and support a just transition to renewable energy and having living wage jobs for labor and community in terms of green jobs creation. Although the network geothermal pilot will involve upfront costs, we believe that it will have a robust return on investment with right financing models and cost benefit analysis as part of a sustainable PGW. The diversification study is a good start, but it's for the benefit of PGW stakeholders, and the city needs a just transition to renewable energy study for all stakeholders, which involve i.e. customers, businesses, taxpayers, and citizens of a public utility. In order for PGW to make equitable and responsible use of ratepayers' funds, it must be informed by up-to-date data and modeling.
30 seconds.
Support the network geothermal project as a next step on the process that includes a strong role for environmental organizations to shape a just transition PW. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Robert Ballinger.
Good morning. My name is Robert Ballinger, and I'm the co-director of the Energy Unit at Community Legal Services, where I represent low-income Philadelphians who maintain essential home utility service. I also serve as public advocate, representing the broad interests of PGW's residential customers as a group in matters before the Philadelphia Gas Commission. The draft diversification study examines some possible options PGW has to move its business away from fossil fuels. PGW currently faces myriad challenges, including but not limited to the climate crisis. As the study recognizes, it's vital that PGW's future is planned with the objective of protecting the safety and health of all Philadelphians, most particularly those Philadelphians who are struggling to get by. Even prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, a large portion of PGW's residential customers were low and moderate income. In 2019, a third of PGW's nearly 500,000 residential customers were confirmed to be low income. Many more are suspected to be. Over the last year, even more PGW customers have struggled to pay their gas bills. In March, PGW reported that nearly 170,000 households were at risk of termination, and those households held over $85 million in debt as of the end of February. All Philadelphians must be able to continue to heat their homes. The City of Philadelphia and PGW must examine options to decarbonize with affordability of heating at the forefront. I appreciate that the draft study incorporates some of this analysis, but look forward to further and deeper analysis in the future. As households with the ability to move away from gas do so, both PGW and the city need to commit to ensuring that those who are currently unable to afford their utility bills will have options to maintain heat in their homes. I appreciate the comments that have been provided by others this morning and look forward to continuing to work with these stakeholders as PGW transitions to a low carbon future. Thank you.
Thank you. Todd Baseon?
Good morning. Good morning, Councilman Green and everyone. It's great to see so many old friends. My name is Todd Bailson. I'm a resident of Philadelphia, and I work for Solar States, which is a Philadelphia-based solar installation and education company. And I wanted to bring a few comments to the discussion from the solar energy business view. The first is that we've come to find that we need to change our discussions as it relates to public policy in Pennsylvania a bit. This state's an energy powerhouse, and we produce more energy than we consume, which very few places do. But culturally, when you spend time in Harrisburg, where a lot of the energy public policy is decided, it's really important to understand this kind of history and a proud legacy as a powerhouse. And people refer to it as an all-the-above energy strategy. The reality, though, is that coal is disappearing as part of the energy mix. Nuclear will also continue to step down, although both will have baseline. And there's very little renewable energy generated in Pennsylvania. The changes have really been as a result of natural gas, which has benefited businesses and consumers by lowering prices, but has all these other impacts. Meanwhile, the way to kind of start to get to an all-the-above strategy is by increasing the amount of renewables. And we can also do these side benefits, saving the family farm, and creating so many jobs. This is also the solar decade nationally. Our trade association has pointed out that with the Biden administration, we have an opportunity over the next 4 years, and these two with the Congress as it sits, whichever side of the aisle you're on, this is an important 4 years for generating momentum in building out solar across the country. As we know, rooftop solar is a great job creator, and it's a good match for workforce development in Philadelphia, where you can get a family sustaining job without necessarily going to college. You can move up the occupational ladder, and it's safe for the 21st century. And last, but most importantly, especially in light of news this week, resiliency is going to be very important, and solar and storage are going to be a key way that we support the grid by allowing people to be resilient. Thank you again for allowing us to participate. Have a great morning.
Thank you. Matt Walker.
Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Walker, and I'm the Advocacy Director with Clean Air Council. We're a nonprofit environmental health organization headquartered in Philly, and we've been working to protect everyone's right to a healthy environment for over 50 years. So in order to meet the city's climate goals, PGW, we know they must transition to sustainable energy utility that no longer uses or provides fossil fuel or fossil fuel derived gas and contributes zero greenhouse gas emissions. Anything less will not adequately address the climate crisis. Figuring out how to transition PGW into an environmentally sustainable utility is a complex topic and requires a robust conversation and engagement process. The council is happy to see the strong stakeholder and public engagement in this process, especially the most energy burdened communities, as well as the level of transparency before a final report is completed. This process includes many elements the council had advocated for years ago, so it's promising to see this process. Thank you. The council is glad to see that public health, safety, and equity was a guiding principle of the analysis. We're also happy to see the serious consideration of how PGW could transition to renewable energy while exploring how this publicly owned utility can reduce climate impacts and air pollution while providing ongoing energy needs and job opportunities. We offer the following suggestions on the report. Under the hybrid electrification model, the report envisions customers adopting heat pumps paired with a gas furnace to meet peak heat demands during the coldest periods of the winter. If it hasn't already been completed, the report consultants should estimate how much backup gas, if any, would actually be needed. That's actually
30 seconds.
Oh, wow. We're glad to see the analysis recognized decarbonized gas as risky. We understand the analysis. Let's see, let's go over this part. We're happy to see all the diversification options you're looking at on page 45 that are under consideration. We recommend modeling how much revenue PGW can make from some of these diversification options suggested in the report. The council understands PGW is involved with liquefied natural gas, but this should be removed from any consideration. We think that more analysis must be done of the cost of the hybrid electrification with the geothermal micro districts.
Thank you. That's your time.
We will be submitting further comments, written comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Alex Dews.
Good morning. I'm the Executive Director at Green Building United. Thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity to provide comments on the draft version of the report and for work to date on this critical and very complex challenge. We look forward to seeing the final version of the report and will continue to work with our member experts to submit a more detailed written version of these comments. We hope we can complement the research done to date to ensure the best possible accuracy and modeling assumptions of this study to further strengthen the case that the high electrification and heat as a service options are most viable. We'd like to review details on the assumptions for building shell upgrades for new and existing buildings on slide 64 and offer to provide comparable cost information from built projects in this region. For the heat pump and hybrid scenarios, we have significant concerns with the cost estimates provided, which range in rigor and credibility from detailed federal government survey data to the contractor lead generation website, Home Advisor. While precision may be difficult to achieve, accurate cost ranges are possible to establish and important considering that they're extrapolated in long-term cost models. We'd like to see more detail on the air source heat pump cost assumptions on slide 68, and in particular, want to understand why the hybrid scenario, which includes both a heat pump and furnace equipment, is assumed to cost $3,000 less than a heat pump on its own. We'd like to know what is included in the price point for a heat pump and how the heat pump tonnage was established, as it's almost twice the size of what we would expect for a typical sized Philadelphia row house. For geothermal micro districts, we understand this was a late addition based on stakeholder input and could not be fully explored, but would like to understand how the process will proceed in evaluating the viability of this and other nascent technology options. Finally, in terms of PGW new business models, we would like to have the opportunity to review the full details and provide feedback on the proposed diversification strategies, as that was the main goal of the study. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Emily Davis. Emily Davis.
My name is Emily Davis. I live in Center City, Philadelphia. First, thanks go to the Office of Sustainability for conducting this study and for looking out for the future of the workers at PGW. There is much work that an organization like PGW can do to support a clean energy future for Philadelphia. But it seems that PGW and its managing board, the Philadelphia Facilities Management Corporation, are not looking out for the future of their workers or trying to help our city meet its carbon reduction and clean energy goals. I was particularly appalled to learn that PGW pays over $400,000 in annual dues to a trade association called the American Gas Association. While I understand membership in AGA can be important in staying informed about best practices in the industry, this group is also writing and lobbying bills that are not in the city's interest. It seems that the leadership of PGW is looking out for gas producers more than the safety of their end users or distributors like PGW. AGA is the group that's promoting the bill 275 that Senator Gene Yaw has introduced in Pennsylvania. This bill would prohibit local governments like Philadelphia from adopting requirements that new buildings use energy-friendly sources. AGA is also discouraging new construction codes that increase energy efficiency. Both of these actions are counter to Philadelphia's climate goals. I understand that Representatives Philadelphia's leadership, PGW's leadership at AGA supported both these actions. It's time that the leadership of PGW considers the goals of the city and the futures of its workers in its decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Lisa Hastings. Lisa Hastings.
Hello.
If not, oh, yes, thank you.
Hi, I'm Lisa Hastings. First, I wanted to say that I agree with everyone. We must stop allowing the expansion of all natural gas use in the city. And we need to move to a diverse portfolio of clean, renewable energy options, including geothermal, solar, and hydrogen. We could use a grid electric renewable hybrid, but we don't need to use a gas hybrid. I agree we need renewable pilot programs and financial support for electrification and renewable energy for low-income households. Although this study provided some interesting information, including that natural gas usage in the city creates more pollution than using grid energy, for the most part, the study was presented without data and was too negative about diversification and conversion to renewable energy and limited in many other ways. It also seemed to assume that all participants in alternative energy, i.e. not natural gas, would no longer be PGW customers, but that is not a given if PGW provides other significant energy options to its customers. It, without backing it up, states that geothermal microgrids will cost a fortune to maintain. It's more expensive than our quote unquote current infrastructure.
30 seconds.
Also, current hydrogen and synthetic hydrogen gas manufacturing are much better and cleaner options than presented. And the conventional gasification that everyone's concerned about is not even necessary anymore to provide hydrogen and hydrogen synthetic gas. So PGW can either invest in the future or get lost in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Francis Upshaw. Francis Upshaw.
Good morning. My name is Francis Upshaw, a board member of Power Interfaith and a founder of our Climate Justice and Jobs team. We at Power are very concerned about the collision of racism, economic inequality, and climate crisis. As people of faith, we are called to be part of the solution, and we call on each of you to also be a part of that solution. We want to see responsive, creative, new ideas. Our climate team members have studied the options for PGW in the study. We recommend a pilot project on geothermal energy. From a good pilot, we can learn how to make this work in a city with high poverty. One way to make energy more affordable is through energy efficiency, home repair, and weatherization. That definitely keeps energy bills lower. PGW should manage the jobs in energy efficiency, home repair, and weatherization. These are good union jobs, and they help our low-income communities afford energy and not lose their homes to gentrification. We need PGW to truly diversify its business model and to think big about new ideas. We are learning about heat as a service. This approach creates incentives for PGW to sell less energy and remain stable. This addresses energy bills and climate crisis. I am a busy church person, not an energy expert, but when we left it to the experts, we got into the mess we are in today. Regular people like me have to raise our voices and call on our elected leaders to listen. And you, our elected leaders, need to tell PGW what direction to take. You need to align the lobbying, the fee structures, everything in a sane way so that the people, the city, and PGW are working together for a vision of clean energy and equity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, Lynn Robinson.
Good morning. My name is Lynn Robinson. I'm the founder director of Neighbors Against the Gas Plants, an active member of several organizations, and a retired Philadelphia public school teacher. I'm disappointed that the Office of Sustainability allowed industry consultants to participate in writing the business diversification study for PGW, but I'd like to credit them for soliciting significant public input. And there's 2 tangible slides to prove it. Network geothermal energy was given mention on slides 34 and 35. However, slide 44 about customer decisions determining the future leaves out geothermal from the chart. There's some transparency in this draft. Slides 31 and 32 look at electrification and hybrid electrification without PGW diversification. Yes, the option of no diversification is given 2 slides. So PGW not diversifying but beyond gas is the exact underlying subtext of this study. The economic predictions dealing with electrification models assume that non-participants are the PGW gas customers and that participants would be randomly scattered throughout the city. Gas mains would still be maintained all over the place. Participants who electrify would pay for installation of their electric infrastructure. Low-income people would all be PGW customers and their bills would go up as PGW shrinks and less gas is sold. I hear you. To make up for the revenues lost, they say sell LNG and CNG. None of it makes any sense. Slides 32 and 47 say hybrid electrification is more equitable economically between participants and non-participants. But how many homeowners are going to crowd 2 heating systems into 1 home? Anyway, I'll skip to the end. As an educator, I give the study draft that I had access to an F for content and a C for presentation. The presentation graphics are easy to read, but since there's no supporting evidence provided for any economic
I think that concludes our list. I'm going to pass it over to either our Executive Director or Chairman Green.
Thank you, Ms. Lai. I want to thank everyone that participated in this morning's town hall. Also want to remind people that if you would like to provide additional written testimony, please do so by Friday, May 28th. You can submit that information to sustainability@phila.gov. In addition, it is my intention to have city council hearings on this study. And we hope to introduce that resolution for hearings sometime in the coming weeks. So that way we can continue to have this conversation and also continue to educate other individuals in the city of Philadelphia, including members of city council and other stakeholders and constituents within the city of Philadelphia regarding this conversation regarding a diversification study being conducted by PGW with resources from the American Cities Climate Change Challenge. I want to thank all of you for being here. Also, we'll continue this conversation, especially as we go into the fall with the potential passage of the American Jobs Plan, which provide dollars regarding infrastructure. I think a number of things that were raised this morning
as well as in the study, provide additional conversations regarding those issues. So I want to thank all of you for being with us this morning, and we'll look forward to continuing this conversation through hearings in City Council.